It is no exaggeration to say that I live for that kid, Kohinata Mukai said, blowing cigarette smoke out into the air, while Itachi held his breath before him. In the hand not holding the cigarette, Mukai clutched the silver bottle of sake. The three ninjas stood looking at each other, surrounded by more than 10 Kirigakyo ninja sprawled out on the ground, unconscious. They had all been defeated by Itachi and Shisui alone. Surrender quietly, Kohinata Mukai, Shisui said from beside Itachi. The comma-shaped marks of the Sharingan had already popped up in his eyes. The Hokage is lenient on those who turn themselves in. He probably won't kill you. Hanging his head to avoid those Sharingan, Mukai let an ironic smile slip across his face. Shisui of the body flicker. I mean, you're a well-known ninja, but still, well, I always got the impression you only walked in places where the sun hits. Or he stopped suddenly and drank from the silver bottle. Is it that you're still just a kid? Mukai opened only his right eye and sneered. His condescending attitude forced a line to carve itself out between Shisui's eyebrows. You know what I've done. You should know whether or not I'd be allowed to turn myself in. A flick of Mukai's thumb and ashes fell from his cigarette. That I would get for my assassins, the two prodigies of the Uchiha clan. At the height of their popularity is truly the greatest honor. He tossed his cigarette in the portable ashtray he pulled out of his pouch and then put the cap on the silver bottle before tucking it away in the pocket of his vest. Real serious situation here, he murmured, his chakra suddenly increasing dramatically. His shadow clones had returned. When Mukai's chakra grew in volume, Itachi released his own shadow clone, standing watch at Konoha Hospital. Now that he knows the dad he was talking to till just a minute ago was a shadow clone, my son's probably angry. Mukai glared at the two ninjas in front of him as he scratched his head. Now I'm going to have to make some kind of excuses when I get home. He dropped his hips low and readied himself with the palms of his hand at chest height, in the manner particular to gentle fist. Why would a ninja as good as you be a spy? Itachi spat out the feelings in his heart. When you get old, things happen. You can't understand what those things are until you get some years on you. So even if I did tell you why, you'd only get the half of it. If you die, what happens to your son in the hospital? Because of those things I mentioned, I can't be dying here, even if you guys were to kill me. Countless lines raced out from Mukai's left eye, all around him. Byakugan! Itachi shouted, but Shisui was already flying backwards to get some distance from Mukai. I can't go easy on you. Forgive me. Mukai's voice reached Itachi's ears. At once, the distance between them closed. With incredible speed, right and left palms came flying toward Itachi's throat at solar plexus, simultaneously. When Mukai's sword hand stabbed into Itachi's stomach, reaching for his solar plexus, Mukai bent his index and middle fingers inside Itachi's body. Ha! Mukai spat out a breath that was a battle cry, and his hand yanked Itachi's intestines. Instantly, the Itachi standing there with his guts ripped out transformed into an overwhelming number of crows and danced upward. Rather than try to avoid the beaks attacking him, Mukai endured it with an elegant turn of his head, as though nothing were happening. Shisui was creeping up behind him, fire style, great fireball technique. He quickly wove the signs, and a ball of fire large enough to swallow Mukai shot out of his mouth. Mukai faced the ball of flames dead on, still standing with the palm of his right hand thrust out in front of his face. Direct hit. No. The ball of flames split perfectly into two in front of him. It didn't look like he had executed some kind of jutsu, and it wasn't as though his body were cloaked in some kind of special aura. To Itachi, it was like the ball of flames itself had decided to split on its own in front of the man. Gentle fist cuts off enemy chakra. Using it means being very familiar with that flow. Jutsu are the embodiment of chakra. If you can read the flow, it's not so tough to split it. Mukai explained with a grin and raced towards Shisui. Shisui's face darkened. Even if he did have above average physical jutsus, his opponent was a user of Gentle Fist, a technique far beyond the level of a physical jutsu. It was no wonder Shisui looked gloomy. Itachi watched from a distance on high as the battle unfolded. Inside the domain of the Land of Fire, 3 or so hours to the north of Konohagakyo, the 3 ninjas were fighting in a small basin surrounded by slightly elevated mountains. Not a single blade of grass grew on the rocky mountains, and there were any number of places for a lone person to hide. Itachi had slipped behind a convenient rock and was watching over the other 2 as they fought. It had only been his shadow clone up against Mukai. Itachi hadn't moved from this place since the fight started. Their opponent was a user of Gentle Fist. It was almost too difficult to strike the killing blow in close combat. This contest would be decided by a single long-distance blow. Sharingan was a visual jutsu. Users put their own chakra into their eyes and ensnared the opponents in the jutsu. In other words, as long as Itachi could see the fight, he could ensnare his enemy in the jutsu. Eyes meeting was not something that happened only subconsciously. Expecting no particular trouble, an enemy would let their gaze race around the scene. As long as that optical axis and the optical axis of the jutsu user were in alignment, it was possible to create a situation in which the enemy's gaze would intersect with the jutsu users, without the enemy even being aware of it. Itachi was waiting for that moment, and to that end, Shisui had dared to take on dangerous close-range combat, trying his best to get Mukai in alignment with Itachi's optical axis. If Itachi could just activate the visual jutsu of the Sharingan, they could make this work. If they managed to pry open one small seam in Mukai's mind, Itachi could use that as a foothold and gradually push his visual jutsu to encroach even further. The problem was that first step. In addition to his vast experience, Mukai was a user of the Byakugan, a Kekai Genkai that allowed the flow of chakra to be sensed visually. Naturally, he understood what the Sharingan was and could do. Itachi and Shisui had adopted this strategy to break down those tall walls. Just barely dodging Mukai's left thrust, Shisui threw his torso back. Given the perfect opportunity, Mukai pressed in on the younger man. Shisui leapt backward, as if in flight. In that instant, Mukai's face was turned toward the rock Itachi was hiding behind, but their optical axes still had not intersected. Mukai turned his gaze toward Shisui as he landed and then abruptly averted his eyes. The Sharingan had been activated. Naturally, Shisui's Sharingan had been a feint. The place toward which Mukai had turned his face was in the exact direction of the rock concealing Itachi. Itachi's gaze, his mind sharply focused on his enemy, and Mukai's gaze, unconsciously taking Itachi in, intersected. Or they should have. When they were a hair's breadth apart, Mukai suddenly kicked at the ground and flew upward. An incredible leap. When he landed, he kicked at another rock and bounded into the sky again. Itachi's hiding spot had been found out. In the previous instant, Mukai had noticed Itachi's presence with the power of the Byakugan. He had probably also in that moment that Itachi's Sharingan had been activated. Perhaps to confirm his own hunch, or perhaps to draw Itachi out into the fight. Either way, Mukai was leaping straight toward the rock where Itachi was hiding. Itachi didn't fail to notice Shisui landing behind him, grinning, before his friend disappeared. Shisui next appeared in front of Mukai. Clicking his tongue, Mukai was knocked back into the rock wall, rising up perpendicularly. As Shisui's kick ripped into his face, his skull split open, or so Itachi thought. Before his eyes took in a splintered log. "Shadow clone!" he cried out. Right. He heard Mukai behind him, gentle fist stance. 8 trigrams, 2 palms. The heels of his right and left palms slammed into Itachi's stomach in succession. 8 trigrams, 4 palms. Before Itachi had a chance to breathe, this time 4 blows slammed into him. 8 trigrams, 8 palms. As if sneering at Itachi's brain as it fumbled for the start of a counterattack, Mukai assaulted him mercilessly with successive attacks. Itachi heard a cry from Mukai's right side, the Byakugan's blind spot. In the corner of Itachi's hazy field of view, Shisui launched a flying kick. Shisui. Itachi had the leeway to murmur his friend's name because Mukai had dropped into a defensive posture. No, the word defensive was too simple. As Mukai dodged the kick merely by angling his head, he grabbed hold of Shisui's neck with his outstretched left hand and held him up high, lifting the sturdy body of the young man with a single arm. Strangled like this, Shisui struggled frantically, but the 5 fingers sunk into his throat simply would not peel away. There's this thing called training that you do to overcome your weak points. The first step in my training was to compensate for the Byakugan's blind spot in one eye with physical jutsu. Don't underestimate this old man, brats. Kohinata Mukai. Unconsciously, Itachi called the name of the powerful enemy before him. His feet had also taken a step forward without realizing it. What? You want me to kill him? It was easy to see why he'd think that. Beaten hard by gentle fists, the flow of chakra in his body interrupted. What kind of counterattack could Itachi have left? Moving forward without any kind of plan was basically an act of masochism. However, Itachi's feet would not stop moving. Even though he didn't remember telling them to do so, they continued to walk artlessly toward Mukai. Then, I'll put him out of his misery as requested. Oh! The hand around Shisui's throat tightened its grip. Mukai was going to crush his Adam's apple. Stop! Itachi shouted, and the Sharingan in his eyes glittered. There's no way that sort of obvious genjutsu is going to work on me, Mukai said, turning his face away from Itachi. Before the man's eyes was Itachi's friend's face. Mangekyo Sharingan, Shisui murmured. The eyes of his friend, now crimson, took on a shape unlike any other Sharingan Itachi had ever seen. Normally, the Sharingan had a small black dot in the center of each eye, and in the circle around that, the snake tails of Magatama-shaped specks popped up. The power differed depending on the number of Magatamas, but the form itself was common to the entire clan. But Shisui's was different. The 3 commas of the Magatama were enlarged and connected, and the small black dot in the center had disappeared, leaving a crimson hollow. If the ratio of red to black in a normal Sharingan was 8:2, then Shisui's eyes at that moment appeared to be a 50-50 struggle for supremacy. Most likely, the intersection of the gazes of Shisui and Mukai had lasted less than 1,000th of a second. For a normal Sharingan, the user couldn't be certain of capturing his opponent in a moment that short. Shisui had not missed that fleeting instant. Mukai had definitely been ensnared in his genjutsu. Mukai! Shisui shouted, dumbfounded, the hand around his throat releasing him at last. Before his eyes, Mukai fell, a spray of blood shooting from his stomach. Itachi stared, rooted to the spot. Mukai had cut his own stomach. The instant Shisui's Sharingan had been activated, Mukai had stiffened slightly and pulled a kunai from his pocket to slash across his own belly. Hold on, Mukai! Shisui shouted, crouching down to cradle the ninja's head. I'm a spy for another village. Any interference with my brain, and a jutsu that makes me end my own life is executed. You can't save me. Mukai coughed, the blood spilling out of his mouth. I've never seen anyone caught in a genjutsu in that short a time before. What the hell was that? Shisui didn't answer. Uchiha's secret jutsu, huh? Shisui faltered, and Itachi glanced at him before addressing Mukai. Do you have anything you want to say? So, this is where we're at. I did what I did on my own. My wife and kid had nothing to do with it. So you're saying the crime of treason was yours alone? Totally selfish, but well. With a trembling hand, Mukai groped for something in his pocket. Itachi pushed aside Mukai's fingers and pulled out the object he was fumbling for. He grabbed a cigarette from the package and put it between the man's lips. Light. This time, Shisui pulled the lighter from Mukai's pocket and held the flame to the end of the cigarette. Mukai took a long drag, letting the smoke flow down to the bottom of his lungs before exhaling the smoke as though relishing the taste. This is how a ninja dies, you know. I'll be waiting for you over there. Mukai's hand dropped, cigarette still between his fingers, and he stopped moving. It's over, Shisui said, his voice shaking with exhaustion. Itachi nodded. That Sharingan. Will you keep quiet about it to the guys in the village? Shisui murmured, still staring at Mukai. Yeah. Mangekyo Sharingan, Shisui said, and his eyes showed once again the strange pattern. When the time comes, I'll tell you, just you, everything. Itachi felt an irresistible attraction to the unknown power secreted away in his friend.